In Warhammer 40k, there are many sites that you just look at and can't help but go awesome. And one of those sites is anything involving the Adeptus Astartes, the Space Marines of the Imperium of Man. And one of the many awesome things about them is the sheer variety. But let's be honest, we all love the big chunky elites, be they Vanguard veterans, Sturmguard veterans, Terminator boys, or even the vaunted chapter masters of these hallowed regiments. Yet that does beg the question, how on earth does a random kid on a backwater planet go from being that to being the Lord Commander of 1,000 Angels of the Emperor? Well, wonder no more, ladies and gentlemen, because in today's Warhammer 40k video, we're going to take a look at the journey from a Space Marine Initiate all the way up to a Chapter Master, and see just how the hell this happens. But without any further ado, ladies and gents, let's get cracking on with today's video. So before we get into the nitty gritty, what on earth is a Space Marine Chapter? The Space Marine Chapter is a formation of 1,000 Space Marines, that being Battle Brothers. That's excluding all the serfs, servants, and any other auxiliary units attached to them. It also is excluding some of their more command staff elements, though it does vary from unit to unit, with some chapters, such as the Black Templars, having a significantly massive amount of Space Marines. It's believed that they could have anywhere up to 12,000 Battle Brothers, being split between actual Battle Brothers and Initiates. But generally speaking, you can count normal Space Marines roughly 1,000-ish plus a little extra. But this wasn't always the case. Originally, the Space Marines were combined into massive legions. These were meant to conquer the galaxy during the Great Crusade in the name of the Emperor of all mankind. However, some of them would go on to turn on the Emperor during the Horus Heresy, and afterwards, Recruitment Guilliman would decree that for a single person to wield a power such as 100,000 Space Marines could not be anymore, at least while the Imperium was in the state that it was. In short, he was trying to consolidate power to make sure that there would be no one who could start a Horus Heresy again, for good or for ill. And that split up thus he penned the Codex Astartes, which dictated that the legions would be split up into 1,000-man chapters, with of course each of them having 10 different companies. The first being the Veteran Company, the 10th being the Scout Company, the 2nd to the 5th being the Line Companies, and then of course the 6th to the 9th being the Reserve Companies, with the 6th and 7th being 2 Reserve Companies, the 8th being a Reserve Assault Company, and the 9th being the Reserve Devastator Company. However, with the introduction of the Primaris Marines and the resurrection of the Recruitment Guilliman, as well as the Ultima founding and the revision of the Codex Astartes, these have been changed to incorporate various different amounts of Space Marine units into roles. Line companies became battle line companies, the assault companies became close support squads, and devastator companies became fire support squads respectively, because it's not just assault marines and devastators in there. So that's the bulk of the company, that's the meat of it all. But then there's one organization above that being the Chapter Command. This includes the chaplaincy, the librarium, the armory, as well as the main HQ, that being where the Chapter Master usually resides together with his honor guard. And of course the Space Marine fleet. Each Space Marine is a self-contained army of itself, with enough strength to see off basically any foe in any scenario, unless it's something completely overwhelming, a la what happened with the breaking of the Cadian Gate and the opening of the Great Rift, in which case that was anything but normal. Now, it's not unheard of that some Space Marine chapters would employ regular humans as auxiliary forces, but the Imperium always looks very shadily at that, because they're like, why do you have normal human folks helping you? Generally speaking, they're going to be small in amount and used for lesser guard duties. But again, it's always one of those things, it depends from chapter to chapter, but you don't want the Inquisition taking a look at you, because that just ends badly for everyone involved. But now that we know what a Space Marine chapter is, we can now look at how does one become a Space Marine. Now you may be thinking this story starts at the Space Marine Initiate, but it doesn't. It starts way before that to be an aspirant. You see, whilst there are indeed crusading chapters which pick from any other goddamn planet, most Space Marine chapters have fief worlds. These fiefs basically allow the Space Marines to pluck people from there, and because of this, a culture would develop around the planet of being chosen to be a Space Marine. Now it doesn't matter whether they know them as the Adeptus Astartes or the Sky Guards warriors, the fact of the matter is they know that if young men prove themselves worthy, they will be chosen. Thus, generally speaking, there will be trials even before this. We have several accounts of world-holding competitions amongst the youth to see who is the best among them. It is then those that earn the right to be chosen to become an aspirant and an initiate by the Adeptus Astartes when they show up. Now the question is how young? Well, there has been some question as to how young it should be, but generally speaking, it's believed prepubescent boys, mainly because when you implant the gene seed, you want to make sure it can be done in conjunction with puberty, not against it, because it kind of messes up a little bit. Though that has varied from chapter to chapter, but generally speaking, rule of thumb, younger the better. Don't take that out of context. But essentially, after a youth has competed amongst the games of his planet, he can then be presented to the Space Marines, which will then decide if he's worthy. This is usually done by genetic checking and spiritual checking. Basically, the chaplain as well as the head apothecary will take a look at him and say, yep, spirit's okay, flesh is okay, no mutations, no demon nonsense. We can take him up and see if he can start the tests. And then from there, their numbers will be incredibly reduced by a significant amount, before eventually we get to the next stage, that being the scout. But I'm getting a little bit ahead of myself here. Because while I was doing research into this video, it turns out that GW already had this thought and they actually include something in the 10th edition codex. There is an article, I guess you could say, called In Memoriam, which basically translates to in memory of. And this basically does what I wanted to do. It literally tells us exactly the story from a scout all the way up into, well, it doesn't make chapter master, but I think it makes first company. So instead of me just waffling on and on and on, now that you got the gist of it, we know what an aspirant is, we know what an initiate is, and now we got into the scout nonsense. So without any further ado, ladies and gentlemen, let's take a look at what GW thinks how a scout can go all the way to a first company veteran. Take it from Warhammer 40k Codex Space Marines, 10th edition. The life of a Space Marine is one of unending battle. Their blood invariably a sacrifice offered up so that humanity may continue to survive. During their long years, Space Marines advanced through their chapter's companies, gaining new skills and a wealth of experience on their journey. Below is a memoriam record of one such Ultramarines Primaris battle brother, Gaius Pollandus. Aspirant. Gaius Pollandus was recruited as an aspirant from the stormy world of Talisar. Though the planet's Ultramarines recruit from are more civilized than those of other chapters, Pollandus' entire youth was still a brutal struggle. Marked from birth for the Space Marine path, he faced grueling tests of martial ability, fortitude, and mental strength from his earliest years. It was a testament to the young warrior's skill and determination that he was successful. 10th Company. Soon began Pollandus' true test. Implanted with cultured gene seed organs and subjected to endless rounds of physical and mental conditioning, psycho-indoctrination, and spiritual assessment, he endured long months of forging upon the anvil of war. Joining the 10th Company as a neophyte Ultramarine, Pollandus' first mission was amidst the thick jungles of Corrigan II, performing reconnaissance of Orc tribal enclaves. Following this came a campaign on the rebellious world of Thanax, where Pollandus' squad spent long months severing rebel supply chains and demolishing supply dumps in the planet's frozen polar reaches. By this point, the neophyte's body has accepted his gene seed, and all of his organs, including those unique to the Primaris Space Marines, had fully developed. So did he earn the right to join Reaver Squad Agamus, first seeing action alongside these new battle brothers in the combat against the Thousand Sons of Hespen, then on the Eastern Fringe as part of a strike force Calespian. It was during this campaign against the burgeoning Tau Empire that while fighting as part of an infiltrator squad, Pollandus landed a killing shot upon a Tau Ethereal. The slaying of so prominent of an enemy leader and the subsequent havoc this wrought amidst the Xenos ranks was enough to see Gaius Pollandus advance to the status of a fully fledged battle brother of the 9th Company. 9th Company. Amidst the ranks of the 9th, Brother Pollandus learned much of the fire discipline, inter-squad tactics, and wilder battlefield strategy. Maintaining his Phobos armor at first, Pollandus' expeditionary marksmanship saw him join an Eliminator squad during the Ultramarines' battles against ancient Necrons on a ruined and forgotten tomb world. Pollandus' squad engaged in tense sniper duels with the elite Necron Deathmarks, and their strike force was making progress against the foe. However, they were pulled out and redirected to the Stellar Empire of Macragge when Death Guard forces pushed through the Parring Cordon to threaten the factory world of Vansor 5. It was during this campaign that Pollandus saw his first battles as a Hellblaster, wielding the solar fury of a heavy plasma incinerator against the plague-ridden foe. Pollandus fought through the Battle of the Iron Steeps and the Serpentine Ambush in this capacity, and earned the respect of his sergeant Darus for his daring and marksmanship both. It was during the last great engagement of Vansor 5, the infamous Forge Mob push, that Pollandus' squad was all but wiped out by thunderous plague burst mortar shelling. Pushing through the abysmal haze, Pollandus and Sergeant Daros alone faced the fury of a Death Guard Defiler sent to break the Space Marine battle line. They stood alone against the ironclad beast and brought it low. Though Pollandus overloaded his gun's machine spirit doing so and was sorely wounded by the resultant blast. It took months for him to recover from his injuries, enough to return to active service. When he did so, he was advanced into the ranks of the 8th Company. 8th Company. Within the 8th Company, Pollandus first fought as a Phobos armored incursor on the moons of Kato. However, in the wake of his terrible wounding on Vansor 5, Pollandus was observed by the company's chaplain as harboring a burning well of anger and hate that needed to be expunged before he could acquire the clarity to join the battle companies. He was thus assigned to an aggressor squad, joining Strike First Callistus as they struck out to break the siege of Astoria. The heretic Iron Warriors had assaulted the mighty fortification, and the Ultramarines led the pushing orbital assault that would break their army. It was a war that lasted 2 full years, and during its prosecution, Pollandus vented his hate upon the heretics that opposed him. By the conflict's end, Pollandus had progressed to leading a combat squad of Inceptors, performing a series of expertly handled beachhead clearance operations that earned him the honor of the Iron Blade. Reserve Battle Companies. Upon advancing to the Reserve Battle Companies, Pollandus served first as a crewman for the Repulsor Executioner, attached to a series of strike forces pushing back the orcs of the Kakaradon sector. He briefly reprised his vanguard role during the culmination of the campaign, fighting as an infiltrator during the last assaults upon the orcs' mountain strongholds. It was his exemplary conduct during these operations that at last earned him the right to join an intercessor squad. Pollandus took up the Sacred Bolt Rifle and battled Tyranids on Horth's Bane, hunted down a raiding force of Night Lords terrorizing the Sanctimius system, and participated in a 3rd Company assault upon the Chaos Knights of House Gust. Following the daring mission, Brother Pollandus became Sergeant Pollandus of the 6th Company, leading a squad of 10 intercessors. His squad was one of the several reserve formations attached to Captain Galenus' 5th Company during the Drakon Crusade. This vast imperial undertaking involved not only the Ultramarines, but also forces of the Adeptus Sororitas, Astra Militarum, and Legio Titanicus, and was launched to reclaim the Drake's Nebula from the forces of the Wordbearers and Black Legion. Over the course of a decade of bloody battle, 6 members of Sergeant Pollandus' squad were slain, while 1 brother was mortally wounded and took up the mantle of the Redemptor Dreadnought. Pollandus himself lost an arm, which was replaced with the finely crafted Augmetic. Yet they endured, and were amongst the victorious forces at the Crusade's end. Having fought for so long with a now much reduced 5th Company, Pollandus and his 2 surviving brothers were promoted permanently into the company's ranks as intercessor sergeants. Battle Companies. Sergeant Pollandus served with distinction amongst the ranks of the 5th Company for several decades. He traveled tirelessly from one war zone to the next, and was renowned as a font of strategic knowledge and spiritual wisdom. He had tempered his earlier fire with much success, forging within himself a core of cold steel from which his brothers drew great strength. Eventually, he and his intercessor squad held a choke point in a complex of angry caverns for 6 days and nights against endless waves of attacking Tyranids. For his marksmanship, his exemplary leadership, and his seemingly impossible victory, Pollandus was elevated as a veteran to the ranks of the 1st Company. 1st Company. Pollandus' first mission with the 1st Company saw him attached to a 4th Company strike team against the renegade Titan works on Agator. His second, and tragically his last, was a deployment in the defense of the Metacarum world of Phaetus on the fringes of Ultramar. There, Pollandus fell while single-handedly holding back a Death Guard assault against the Apothecarian Primus facility, while the rest of his squad evacuated key personnel and reserved gene seed banks. After Pollandus was slain by a Death Shroud Terminator, his brothers launched a blistering assault to reclaim his body. So was Pollandus brought to his home of Talisar, and at last laid to rest in his family's crypt. His bolt rifle inscribed with his name was returned to the chapter armory, there to await its next worthy wielder. And honestly, ladies and gentlemen, that was pretty much perfect. It really shows how one goes from being a scout all the way up to being a veteran of the first company. Yet, sadly, it doesn't end with him as chapter master, it ends him dying as a veteran. As a Space Marine, your duty is to fight and to die for the God Emperor. And unfortunately, we didn't get Chapter Master Pollandus. And that is the reality for most Space Marines. They don't live to become amazing, great, awesome captains or anything, they often die. That is their duty, to serve and to fight. And only in death does duty end. That's why officers of a Space Marine chapter get such attention to them, because to survive long enough to be that way, you've definitely earned your stripes. Even more so for a Space Marine chapter master, which is more often than not the greatest of his chapter. Not in only martial capacity, mind you, but in pretty much every single aspect that a chapter values. So instead of me going on and on and on and on again about what exactly how to get from scout to chapter master, I want to talk about what that part of the Imperium left out, that being the chapter master. Essentially, how does one become a chapter master? And that all depends on the chapter in question. The chapters of the Adeptus Astartes are varied and oh so varied. There is a unique chapter for a unique thing about a unique person in every single instance. There are so many of them. Yet generally speaking, there are two things that influence a chapter. That being their primarch progenitor as well as the world in which they grew up on. That being the world in which they are from. Just as Space Marines have such an insane impact on the culture of the populace of a world, so too does their populace impact the culture. A prime example would be aquatic worlds, with chapters such as the Iron Snakes and the Dark Krakens having heavy motifs of slaying sea serpents involved in that chapter, with both of them having it being the final test for their aspirants. In addition, this has led to them being experts in dealing with all types of aquatic warfare, because their planet is aquatic, thus it impacts them. Again, even more greater examples being Space Wolves versus Salamanders. On Nocturne, there was so much death and destruction due to the sheer nature and instability of the world. Banding together in a family formation was a necessity, not just a good thing to have. The entire village, the entire community had to come together. In addition, because of Nocturne's material wealth, and for the lack of automation as well as travel on the planet, you had to become an independent metal worker yourself. Or metal shaper was the term used, or blacksmiter for the lesser but still very good terminology. Thus, when Vulcan took over, he imparted that onto his legion, and the legion, people being drawn from there, imparted it onto itself. Fire, flames, forging, anvil, everything, community, family, it imparted itself and made the Salamanders the Salamanders. Same thing with Fenris and the Space Wolves. Fenris is very tribalistic, it has that heavy dose of that tribal energy, that being skill at arms, but not just skill at arms but cunning as well is also very important. Bravado, honor, being a sworn brother, a sword brother, standing together with one another, being honest in your words, as well as excessive partying, all played a massive impact on the people of the world, and thus the Adeptus Astartes who were drawn from that world. And I could go on and on and on about that. You cannot separate the culture of a people from the world, from the Adeptus Astartes who were drawn from said world. They are one and the same, nearly completely interchangeable with one another. But now onto the other reason, that being the primarch progenitor. Now, a primarch progenitor has an impact on a chapter because of the gene seed, but it is not nearly as big as an impact as the culture of a planet. Whilst it's true that those of Guilliman's gene seed are going to be more reasonable, more understanding, and better with logistics, that doesn't mean that they're going to be another version of the Ultramarines. And I guess that the Adeptus Astartes of the Ultramarines are the most grievous when it comes to their successes being divergent, with things like the Mortifactors and the Emperor's Spears being very un-Ultramarine-y. Yet that doesn't change the fact that they both acknowledge Rabute Guilliman as their prime progenitor, and they inherit some of the traits of the Ultramarines. Not all of them, mind you, but enough. That being their tactical flexibility and their adaptability in a scenario. Now, whilst the Ultramarines are the main culprit for their successor chapters being a bit divergent, they are not the only ones. Every single genetic lineage of a Primarch has at least one chapter that is not like the others, and that's just because of the nature of humanity, people change. But some Space Marine genetic lineages have more power over others than some. I of course refer to the divergent chapters. Space Wolves and Blood Angels being incredibly notable here because of their genetic defects. Every single successor of the Blood Angels has the Red Thirst, and sadly the Black Rage. And so too do the Space Wolves have the Calyx Helix, and all the luck that goes on with that. But even disregarding genetic traits, there are some other tendencies that unite chapters of a common lineage together. An example being all the unforgiven, those descended from the Dark Angels and Lionel Johnson. They are all joined together and connected together in communication with one another to help the Dark Angels track down the Fallen. Now granted, not the entire chapter knows, but at least that the chapter High HQ knows about it. In a little more warm, I guess you could say, we then have the Salamanders have the Promethean Creed. This is essentially the teachings of Vulcan and Nocturne combined with what they believe a Space Marine should be, protectors of humanity. And every single Salamander successor chapter has a chaplain sent from the Salamanders to help teach them and inspire the societies and the people around them. All except for the Black Vipers, because the chap who went for them kinda went missing, which may or may not have been Cole's fault. But those are the two main things that impact a Space Marine chapter. They're not the only things, mind you, as a severely traumatic event like their planet being lost to the Tyranids could turn them into a crusading chapter that specializes against hunting down Tyranids. Not the first thing to happen, and certainly won't be the last, but those are the two main. Now, why is it important to bring up what a chapter is when talking about a chapter master? Because as I said, a chapter master is the culmination of the perfect Space Marine in that chapter's idea. In their mind's eye, what they consider to be a perfect Space Marine, more often than not, that chapter master must fit. At least mostly, because humans are humans. And that brings me to my next point. Not only does a chapter master need to be a martial powerhouse, need to be culturally appropriate and fit the idea, he also needs to be politically savvy. Some of the greatest chapters are the chapters that have endured. People think of chapters like the Marines Malevolent, or the Flesh Terrors, or the Black Templars. How is it that these chapters that are so hilariously divergent and committed so much bullshit still alive, around, and kicking with the Inquisition and all that? And that's because all the bullshit they do, plot armor, bad writing, whatever you want to call it, their chapter masters are not idiots. Individual captains of there may be idiots, but their chapter masters know what's good and what's not. They are politically savvy, because being the leader of an organization, you can't just be good with your fists, you gotta be good with your mind as well. Each and every chapter master is a master of political analogy. They are a political animal, they know what's going on in the wider the Imperium in their current sector, and they know how to interact with other factions of the Imperium. But Brad, surely not everyone is as good as that. What happens to those who aren't that particularly savvy? Well, those end up destroyed, deemed excommunicate traitores or renegade. And whilst it's not easy, if the Inquisition decides they want to look at it, well, there are very few things a Space Marine chapter can do, which is why prevention is so much better than cure. Taken from Inex Astartes Volume 4. On occasion, it may be an Inquisitor who moves against a chapter. Such action would only be considered in the most extreme of circumstances, as an entire chapter of Space Marines is a foe few armies could hope to challenge. Upon declaring a chapter excommunicatus, an Inquisitor will attempt to determine the root cause of the rebellion, in order to gauge the potential obstacles to neutralizing it. Should he suspect chaos is the reason for the chapter's fall from grace, the Grey Knights may be mobilized. Should doctrinal heresy prove the immediate cause, then the elite of the Adeptus Sororitas may be the only force considered capable of prosecuting a war of faith against the wayward chapter. On rare occasions, alien intervention may be suspected, and the highly skilled servants of the Ordo Xenos brought in to investigate. Such an event is of import as to attract the attention of the High Lords of Terror themselves, and no Inquisitor would bring such accusations without very convincing evidence indeed. On other occasions, it may be sufficient for the Inquisitor to approach the master of other chapters. To a Space Marine, the very notion of a brother exceeding his Emperor-given mandate is anathema. It is to disobey the direct word of the Emperor himself, and so a simple word in the ear of a chapter master may bring about the censure or outright subjugation of the chapter in question. Space Marine chapter masters and Inquisitors are individuals well placed to appreciate the devastating consequence of galaxy-wide sedition and rebellion, and have on many occasions worked in concert to quell such threats before any other authorities become aware of them. Actually conducting an investigation and gaining evidence against a suspect chapter is in most cases next to impossible. Even the most loyal of chapters will be far from open with what they regard as prying outsiders. In the extremely rare instance of a chapter actually reneging on its own vows to the Golden Throne, no investigation will be necessary or possible. The evidence will be clearly visible and damning in the extreme. It is not recorded how many chapters have been purged this way, as all recording of their existence will be expunged upon their defeat. It can be estimated, however, that as many as a dozen chapters may have been completely destroyed and subsequently deleted from the records. while a small number of others have been declared excommunicatus, but are still at large somewhere in the galaxy. Often the progress of the fall of a chapter goes unseen until the dramatic moment at which it is judged to have crossed the line and turned renegade. Even the term renegade is only relevant to outsiders, a matter of judgment rather than objectivity. For example, a Space Marine chapter may subjugate a rebel world and be welcomed by the populace as saviors and beg to rule over them. Such a situation is not without precedent, for the Ultramarines rule an entire realm, but this is most definitely outside the mandate of a Space Marine chapter, and so, the sin of pride may lead a chapter down the road to ruin. I really do love that excerpt because it shows the complexities of the Imperium. For those who don't know, the Imperium is kind of like the HRE. It's a bunch of different microstates holding everything together in one big fucking trench coat. Space Marines do whatever the fuck they want. The Inquisition does whatever the fuck it wants. However, both Space Marines and Inquisitors know it is a lot easier for us to settle this outside the court than to get the High Lords involved, because then everything just goes to shit. Which is why it's very common to have a Space Marine captain or a Space Marine officer be a dickhead and not know how to properly deal with things. But it is very rare to have a chapter master be like that. Because as I said, usually they will end up dead and the whole chapter goes with them. But more often than not, they will be challenged within their own chapter. Space Marines are loyal, but they are human. So, if a Space Marine captain thinks a Space Marine chapter master is not doing what he should do, it's well within his right to challenge him to a duel. Now this duel can either be a martial duel, sword against sword, but it's not uncommon for another duel to take place. I can imagine that a chapter being descended from the Iron Hands, the duel would be to create the most perfect machine tool. Perhaps if you're a Fenrisian descendant, the goal is to hunt down a very large creature. Or hell, if you're an Ultramarine descendant, maybe the goal is to have a good old-fashioned shouting match, a debate, like in the days of ancient Rome. Now this may sound silly, but many oftentimes these are preferred. Now remember, Space Marines are demigods, yeah, but they're still human. And just like humans, it's sometimes run like a company. Now, you don't always want to fire somebody, but hey, maybe they need to be knocked down to their position or they need to be changed. Now, does this often lead to resentment? Absolutely. But again, resentment doesn't always translate into outright betrayal. It can, because that makes for good story writing, but not always the case. And in very rare cases, a Space Marine chapter master may be seen that he's wrong and may step down due to this duel, be it by blades or by another means. Again, doesn't always happen, but it can. Space Marines are wide and varied. So, to say that their circumstances are wide and varied is absolutely true. But again, it's one of those things where a chapter master needs to be on his game. He has to be wary of not only his own chapter politics, but also the politics of the Imperium. Essentially, if the chapter master is a leader, he's a wrangler, he's a manager. You gotta make sure that his chapter is happy, that his chapter is being satisfied, both internally, but also make sure that externally, not only is he seeing to his duty as an Adeptus Astartes, but also making sure that the Inquisition is seeing that he's doing his duty as an Adeptus Astartes, lest they get involved. Space Marines can do whatever the hell they want, but the Inquisition as well as other forces can indeed lodge complaints. And if a Space Marine chapter does not behave well enough, it may end up like the Marines Malevolent, who are so utterly decried and hated by the Imperium that the Adeptus Mechanicus has straight up put a blacklist on them. They cannot get any of their arms and equipment from the Mechanicus, because they burned so many bridges. Again, it's a chapter master's job to make sure that all those mistakes don't come back to the rest of the chapter and bite them in the ass. Now you may be thinking, this has to be simple, Brad, just don't step on anybody's toes. But it's a lot harder than you think. Space Marines are human, yeah, but they're also demi-humans, they're demigods. They're better than us. And they don't think like the Imperium. Whereas like a guard regiment is held together by the culture of the Imperium, most people tend to forget that Space Marines have their own unique culture that is separate from the Imperium. The most stark and terrible example of this is in regards to the Emperor of all mankind. Whilst the Black Templars and one or two other chapters may venerate him as a god, the vast majority of Space Marines do not see him as a god. They see him as how the Great Crusade saw him, the master of mankind, the very human master of all mankind. And just like him, and just like they were taught, to venerate him as a god is not a good thing, but in fact a terrible insult to the greatest of all man. Or is it so unfathomable to the small-minded people of the Imperium that a human could rise to be as powerful as a god, but still be very much a man. For whilst they are called demigods, the Adeptus Astartes are still men. They are still human. And that is what is most important. Not what fancy title those pricks in the Administratum and Ecclesiarchy declare him. And you'd be surprised how often this leads to conflict, because not all Space Marines like to keep a quiet tongue. Some of them like to very openly tell people how they feel. And if there is any type of incident, it's the chapter master's job to make sure that doesn't spill over into outright hostility. And again, you'll be thinking, oh Brad, come on, that won't happen. The Imperium is run by faith, not good faith, zealous faith. And when zealous faith meets something that says something other than itself, there's only one way to get rid of it. And that is with holy fire. Taken from Throne World. I agree, but Isak has the right. We have a different kind of battle to fight now. The supplicants kept their distance from the chapter master's quiet conference. All save one. The fat man sealed into ceremonial ecclesiarchy robes, so encrusted in jewels that they were as thick as a breastplate. Ecclesiarch Mesring. He came over, sweating under the weight of his robes of office, despite the 4 hollow-eyed shaven-head acolytes holding his train. A whole host of others trailed him, priests, scribes, and petitioners, anxiously awaiting a moment to speak with him. Mesring interrupted the Space Marines impolitely. "Chapter Masters, I come to offer my thanks. You do the Emperor's duty, and he is pleased." Colin turned from his conversation with Thane. "You are Mesring, Ecclesiarch of the Adeptus Ministorum?" Mesring was taken back at Corin's feigned ignorance, but rallied well. "A grandiose title for a humble role. How fortunate to interpret the Emperor's will." He bowed stiffly from the waist, his chins wobbling with effort. "And it is a glorious to stand before his favorite servants, his holy sons." His pale flesh gleamed, and he slurred his words despite his manners. Corland suspected he was drunk. "Your garb tells another story than humility," said Thane. "You tell me the Emperor is pleased. Who are you to know?" "You gainsay the will of the Holy Emperor?" said Mesring. "Your religion means nothing to me," said Thane. "My chapter follows the tenets of the imperial truth, set down by the Emperor during the Great Crusade. How quickly you have forgotten it. We are not holy. Do not treat us as such." 1,500 years is a long time, Chapter Master, said Mesring. "The imperial truth is all but forgotten. The scriptures tell us that the Emperor conveyed it as a necessary lie. The very name is an exercise in irony. Only in death has the Emperor cast off his corporeal cloak and revealed himself to us in his true glory." "I disagree," said Thane. "Your cult professes his memory with idolatry." "When will the Adeptus Astartes see the light?" said Mesring. "It troubles me, my son, that the Emperor's own angels deny the truth." "We are not angels," snorted Thane. "You were among those who urged the populace to take the oath of crusade," said Corland. I did, as was only right." "It may be proved to be wholly wrong," said Corland. "A rash move that risked provoking the orcs and cost the lives of millions, while you and Tool and the others who promoted it remained alive and well." A flicker of consternation crossed Messering's face. "Then it is good you are here now, to fight them on our behalf." "Aye, that is what we are, priest. Warriors," said Thane. "One day I hope to bring all our mighty warriors into the truth of the faith. Some perhaps more amenable than others." His gaze stayed around the room, looking for someone. He smiled secretly to himself. "Then go and speak with them," said Thane. He glared menacingly at Mesering. until the ecclesiarch made his excuses and left. A surge of anger built up in Colin's chest. The men and women around him had been scheming while terror burned. The temptation to sweep it all aside was great. "I am done here," he told Thane. "I return to the fleet. The Senatorium is broken. All the High Lords invested only in their own advancement. I have heard the name of the Emperor invoked by every charlatan in this house. This cannot be allowed to continue." With that, he departed the room, the crowd parting hurriedly before him. Now this, ladies and gentlemen, is a prime example of why you need to be tactile and rather political when dealing with someone in the Imperium. Because, ladies and gentlemen, you will be incredibly surprised by the amount of normal, unaugmented human beings who think that a Space Marine just straight up won't fucking kill them. My god, ignorance sure is a bliss. Also, stupidity seems to be more and more common the higher up you get in the ladder. How's that for commentary on society? But that chap in particular, Corland, was part of the Imperial Fists. A first founding chapter has a lot of leeway to move, meaning that he can say a few things that other chapters can't get away with. If you're just a regular old standard chapter, you don't got any immense heritage, you don't got some fancy gears, you don't have any allies, if you're just alone, the only thing you have is force of arms. And whilst force of arms is a hell of a thing to have, it can easily be twisted and changed. For example, if you meet an Imperial governor, let's say he's the governor of a sector, and he will hold your right, that being arms, munition, equipment, and help while you fight off a Chaos Incursion. This Chaos Incursion then wrecks you, killing half your chapter, but it's fought off. If you then turn your guns on to that guy, he can then ring and go, "Oh no, help, please help." Thus the Imperium is going to side with him against you. And unless you got other allies willing to back you up, a la other Space Marines or other organizations within the Imperium, you're going to end up on the losing side about that. You're either going to have to back off or be declared excommunicate traitoris. Now that's very unlikely to happen because another Space Marine will always go to bat for another Space Marine. I mean, hell, that's how the whole Badab War happened. But a Space Marine is not invulnerable. A Space Marine is not invincible. Complacency is the quickest way to an early grave in the Imperium. You always have to be prepared, you always have to plan, and you always have to make sure that your chapter is in a position of strength, not just by force of arms, but you have allies within the Administorum, the Ecclesiarchy, other Space Marine chapters, other organizations of the Imperium, because, ladies and gentlemen, in the Imperium, a civil war is not something that might happen. It's a case of when it will happen. Internecine and interpersonal conflict within the Imperium is part of the course, because the Imperium is run by personality, not rule nor law, despite what the Adeptus Terra may say. Thus, it often boils down to who has the bigger personality, you or the dude you're fighting. It's very medieval in that sense. So to be a chapter master, you need to make sure that you're able to wrangle your chapter inside and out. It's a very fine line, and that's why chapter masters are so incredibly important. A good chapter master is kind of like a good king. Underneath them, the chapter will flourish, it will thrive, and it will reach heights never before seen. In the same vein, a bad chapter master is also like a bad king. It could lead to the ruin and the destruction of the entire organization. Thus, whilst you can easily get to the rank of captain or to get to the rank of veteran, I say easy with heavy quotations there, to actually be a proper chapter master, you need to be someone who knows not only your chapter inside and out, who knows every single company, who knows every single avenue, who knows every single captain, but also you need to know every single organization outside of your chapter and how your chapter is viewed by them, but more specifically, those who have it against your chapter. That is incredibly important, because whilst you can get away with having few allies, you cannot get away with having many enemies. A prime example of chapter masters making a poor decision is of course the Badab War. There, the Mantis Warriors and the Lamenters joined up with the Astral Claws, and ultimately those two chapters, who joined up for good, honest, true reasons, bonds of fellowship and brotherhood, again, a Space Marine will always go to bat for another Space Marine, ended up with terrible fates. The Mantis Warriors, those who are so fond of their homeworld and their populace, had it taken from them. The Lamenters, who are perpetually on a ring of bad luck, had to go on a penitent crusade, which nearly ended with them getting destroyed by a high fleet of Tyranids. To be a chapter master is a great thing, but it's also a very dangerous thing. Because if you fuck up even a little bit, not only you, but your whole entire chapter is down the drain, and the legacy of a chapter is worth more to a Space Marine than his own life. And I cannot stress this enough. Being a chapter master in a position where your chapter is on a knife's edge is terribly hard. But it is not only by political machinations can a chapter come to ruin. For ladies and gentlemen, a political issue is so much easier to solve than the wrath of an Orc war, a Tyranid High Fleet, or an Eldari Craftworld. And then, for a chapter master to die fighting alongside his veteran company, that would be a good death. However, more often than not, chapter masters face a terrible, terrible reality, or it is very easy to die fighting while your house breaks around you. But how on earth do you rebuild something that was shattered utterly? And that is the true test of a chapter master. Taken from Size of the Emperor. The forward ramp of the Thunderhawk ratcheted open on failing pneumatics, clanging down like the toll of a funeral bell. Armored boots descended. 17. No, 18 decorated veterans, bearing ornate gold and power scythes filling out onto the deck of the Heart, their eyes stern and silently accusing as they faced down their humble brethren. And behind them, long grey tresses bound up in the traditional style of mourning, and with his exquisitely embroidered cloak trailing on the floor, came the chapter master himself. The great hangar was almost oppressively silent, save for the final cooling creaks of the gunship's engines and the footfalls of the approaching honor guard. Every battle brother, serf, and retainer stood stiffly at attention as the last surviving officer from the fall of Sotha prepared to give account. Without ceremony or fanfare, Master Throka drew up before Thracian and his warriors. He cast solemnly about the group. "Is it true then?" he asked. His voice was plaintive, carrying little of the stern authority that Thracian remembered. No, he could not meet the chapter master's gaze, for somewhere amongst the assembled mortal crew, he heard a woman sobbing, and his voice cracked before he could even speak. He swallowed hard. "It is," he managed to mumble. At the sound of those two words, one of the honor guard veterans stumbled, falling to his knees and letting out a most undignified wail of sorrow. Tearful mortal retainers surged forward, urging the Space Marine up and heaving his scythe back into a trembling grip, then kissing their fingers and touching upon his oath seals and the aquila of his blazon. Other serfs began to weep openly at the sight, the flimsy denial that had kept them at their posts all this time, now shattered. Thracian felt tears sting his own eyes. Though he finally managed to look up at the waiting chapter master, he would tell of Zebulon's worthy sacrifice, and Levitus, and Signs, and Throka stepped forwards and embraced him. "Did it, brother?" the chapter master whispered, his sincerity clear. "My heart is broken by the loss of our homeworld, but you escaped the massacre that claimed so many others, and I am so very thankful for that. While even just a handful of us remain, there is still hope for the Size of the Emperor." The chapter master understood and clapped a sympathetic hand upon Thracian's pauldron. Then he turned, raising his voice so that he could be heard by all upon the embarkation deck. "Brothers and honored servants of the chapter, we endure. Make no mistake, I am distraught that our enemies have wounded us so deeply, but thanks to the valiant efforts of Captain Thracian and the sacrifices made of our fallen brethren and retainers, we remain unbroken. Let us mourn Sotha's loss, but stride ever forwards and never forget the lessons we have learned. Our eternal duty is to the people of the Imperium, and we will not allow the same fate to befall another world, while a single one of us yet stands with our folks in his hands." At the mention of this far more noble calling, the assembled scythes visibly straightened, their expressions hardening. Throka walked between them as he spoke, addressing Space Marine and mortal alike with equal measures of respect and dignity. "I would have future generations see this as the dawning of a new age in our glorious history, We will salvage whatever we can from the ashes of our defeat, and we will bring our vengeance home upon the foul Xenos. Salvation shall be ours, brothers and sisters. Salvation shall be ours. He gestured out through the shimmering atmospheric field at the mouth of the hangar to the planet below. It is my intention to establish a new fortress monastery here at the Giant's Coffin. We will fortify and we will rebuild. From the hardy stock of Imperial Prime, we will raise our new battle brothers, and this world shall become our home. Let no foe, Xenos, witch, or rebel believe that we will ever be set adrift again. Cheers went up, along the cries of "For Sotha! Salvation!" From the viewing galleries overhead, salutes were exchanged, and fresh oaths sworn and witnessed. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is the test of a chapter master. Because as awesome, as great, as amazing, and as powerful it is to be the chapter master of the Adeptus Astartes, it comes with so many risks and so many responsibilities. To serve is to die. To die is to be redeemed. And redemption is the goal of every man, be they demigod or not. So in the end, to discuss how one becomes a scout and then all the way to a chapter master, it's simple, but it's not easy. Firstly, you need to survive long enough, which is rather hard for a space marine. But in surviving, you need to understand that to be a space marine is not just to be a warrior. It is, ironically, as Gilliman put it, to be a holistic aspect of the Imperium, to be a judge, to be a lawmaker, to be a financier, to be an administrator, to be a logistician, and to be a warrior as well. A chapter master is not just the best fighter, that's what the champion is for. A chapter master understands his own chapter, his own culture, his own Primarch inside and out, and then he understands how his Imperium views his chapter inside and out twice over. Thus, to be a chapter master, you need to understand every goddamn thing in between. And if you don't, either this foul galaxy will claim you, or you will be overcome by one of your enemies, or even worse, one of your subordinates. In the end, most Space Marines will never be anywhere near a chapter master or even his honor guard. They will live as veterans, and they will die as veterans. But ultimately, the journey of a Space Marine, from aspirant to initiate, to neophyte, to scout, to reserve brother, to frontline brother, to veteran, to sergeant, to captain, and eventually to chapter master, is one that many Space Marines have journeyed, and that many more will continue to journey. But the question is not if you can get all the way to a chapter master. The question is, if you get there, will you be worthy enough to be a chapter master? Will you be good enough to not only keep the status quo of your chapter, but to see it advance and grow beyond your wildest dreams? Or, like Horus and so many others before you, will your pride and vanity lead to the damnation and destruction of your brethren and everything you hold dear? When that is the alternative, it makes you understand why many people are very hesitant about becoming a chapter master of the Adeptus Astartes. But yeah, ladies and gentlemen, thanks so very much for watching. Let me know down below, what do you guys think about going from Scout all the way up to Adeptus Astartes Space Marine? Have you guys ever thought about this? What's your favorite story about a youngin turning into someone veteran of a chapter? And which chapter do you think, if there's any, leads the best to this? I'd love to hear your thoughts down below. Ladies and gentlemen, I want to say a massive thank you guys for watching, but even more massive thank you to my awesome members and patrons. Shout out to my Lieutenant tier members, Mr. Eddie V3 and Miss Majora of the Void. Shout out to my Sergeant tier members, Mr. Damiak, Mr. Andy McGee, Mr. Bowen, Mr. Sean IRL7, Mr. Matthew Merrill, Mr. Sergeant Cossack, 68W173D, and Mr. That Guy. Shout out to my corporate tier members, Mr. Tremail the Math Kitty, Lord Rosarius, Tech Priest Toaster, Mr. Bowen, Shauna Smithers, The Gentle Salamander, The Wench of Warhammer, Major Doshinect, Edward King, and Mr. Overanalyze This. And finally, but absolutely not least, shout out to my privateer members, Mr. Thomas Moslons, Mr. Ivan_SBW, Mr. Monkey Man, Mr. Michael Ayeda, Mr. Diego Castro, Mr. Portus Unum, Mr. CMD Nay, Mr. Eric Massaro, Mr. Dom Marek, Mr. Ken_Sakura333, Mr. Adrian Von Furen, Mr. Morally Bankrupt, Mr. Matthew Peter, Mr. Josh Lee 1320, Mr. Adrex X1, Mr. Ethan Elam U71, Mr. Kiri Khan, Mr. Malpace-XB1XE, and Mr. Robert Makorovich. Thank you. I love you. I appreciate you. Sign up there with our memberships. You get a bunch of awesome benefits, behind the scenes stuff, early access to these videos, special member only content. But most importantly, you get help out this channel. And remember, whether you give your boy $1 or not, I will love you just the same. Mwah! Ladies and gentlemen, I've been the General Bradley 101. You've been beautiful, awesome, and amazing people. Thank you so very much for watching. You want to say hello there, boys and girls? And I will catch y'all next time. Dismiss, Rangers. Man, being a space marine is cool, but god damn it, it is fucking rough. 40K really ain't for motherfuckers, innit?